Welcome to Coffee with Kay, where we're going to make sure the coffee is always served strong, but it's also going to come with a side of truth, and that's truth with a capital T. The truth of God, that is. I'm here to equip and encourage you, Saint. Yep, that's right, you. And if you're not familiar with the sainthood, I want to teach you what it is, and I want to invite you to the family. So, let's get right into it.
Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle hums, ready to race to you. Monday, happy days. Tuesday, happy days. Monday, happy days. Tuesday, happy days.
Hi, Dietra and David. Thanks so much for coming on Coffee with Kay today. I'm so excited to have you guys here. And I actually brought my coffee this time, which has not happened on this podcast for a while with all my morning sickness. I think this is the first time I haven't actually just had a cup full of water. So I'm enthralled and feeling.
Well, congratulations for being past that
Thank
phase,
you.
hopefully.
Yes, I've only had a
Yes.
few bouts since my 18-week mark, and I'm so grateful because that was no joke. I was telling my husband how in some of the last episodes, I really had to edit them so hard because I was so breathy in them because I was trying so hard like to not make myself gag while I was talking to people. So this is the first episode where I'm feeling myself and awake and lively, and I'm so excited. And I'm even more excited because, as we just talked about, I've been waiting all week to hear like the full scope of y'all's story. So I met Dietra virtually on the gram. How is that not how people meet nowadays? Which honestly is really cool. Sometimes it's very strange. But we have talked back and forth on Instagram for almost a year, we realized. And I hype up Dietra all the time to my family, to my husband, just what her and her husband do in their ministry and who they are as people and things that they share on their Instagram, just ways that she's encouraged me and shared passages of the Bible with me and prayers with me. It's just been super cool. So I guess it was last week or week before when I released my gender straightening podcast episode. If you haven't listened, pause this episode, go listen to that episode. I'm not gonna lie, it was fire. Like the Holy Spirit was so there. I don't even know how like I said, I was so morning sick when I recorded that episode. I was so worried that I was just ranting about stuff. I didn't even know if I was saying anything that was coherent. But like the Lord pulled through for me. And so Dietra reached out and was just so encouraging about that episode and shared part of her testimony and her husband's testimony, which just stopped me in my tracks because I had no idea that it was part of their past. And I was like, hold up, like, wait, you slow down, wind it back. What? And you'll find out why I had that reaction here in just a few minutes as you get to listen to this amazing couple share their story of how God has changed them from who they used to be into a new creation through salvation through Christ. And just be able to be encouraged and learn from their story as brothers and sisters, or if you're not in the faith, just being able to learn that Christians come in all different shapes, colors, and sizes, and from all different paths, which is just amazing. There's really no other faith that brings people together the way that Christ does.
So
And so I asked if they would come on and share their story. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is like one of the first times y'all have talked about this like in a public sphere, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, other than like maybe a Bible study
Okay.
or a community group kind of thing, if the topic came up. But yeah, in a public like setting where, you know, anyone can listen to it.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, like praise God for that, because I mean, you definitely don't have to talk about this with us on this episode, on this podcast. But I've just been praying that God would use this platform to reach out to the brokenhearted and minister to the brokenhearted, because that is really what K Price Ministries is about. I want to reach the broken. and share that there's a way to heal, and that's through the blood of Christ. And you guys have
Mm-hmm.
just an incredibly redeeming, healing story. And I just would love to get right into it. So thank you guys so much for coming on and for trusting me with this conversation and with your stories. I really appreciate it. And I just pray that whoever is listening to this episode would be filled with God's love
Yes.
and God's truth
Amen.
as you get to listen to this couple. And so I'm going to let y'all take it away. And I would love to just hear uh, who you guys are, if you'd like to share where you're from, and how y'all met. So let's just jump right into it.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank
Yeah, we're
you.
excited to be here as well. Well, it's interesting. Like as you were kind of starting this conversation, I was thinking to myself, like this topic kind of leads up to the whole reason we met in the first place,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
So I'll just say that right off the bat, and then I guess we can introduce ourselves. My name's David Evans, and you're
I'm Dietra Evans.
Dietra Evans, my wife. We've been married for about a little over 8 years. We have 2 boys and another who knows what on the way. And yeah, so the past 2 years we've been living kind of missionary lifestyle, just following the Holy Spirit in our ministry, which, yeah, so 2 years ago, God just was like, I got pulled. I had a $20 an hour job at Whole Foods Market. I was a manager, and
Climbing the corporate
kind
ladder.
of climbing the corporate ladder, trying to do things my own way. And then God took me out with a huge injury and gave me a vision,
Oh,
and
wow.
basically got called into ministry in a
Mhm.
radical way, which was kind of my salvation story as well.
Wow.
Was coming to Christ in a radical way. And so I say all that to say, we've kind of been on this road with the Lord of, honing in on what he wants us to do for him.
Mhm.
And so what that looks like right now is now we have a house church in Galveston,
Yeah.
Texas.
Like we knew I was a stay-at-home mom during that time. Like I had my kids on this amazing schedule. Meal plans were, like perfectly fleshed out. Like just everything was so scheduled. And then he got this injury and it kind of shook our world up. Like the doctors were saying, oh, he's going to be out for 6 months to a
Wow.
year and he's going to need surgery. And then the Lord actually healed
Oh, praise
him.
God.
And the doctors were kind of like, what? Like you needed an injury? Like you don't have an injury now.
Oh.
Like
Yeah.
it was crazy.
I was on like crutches and a cane for like a month and a
Get
half,
out.
which was
Mhm.
amazing. But then by the time like I had that vision, so I went back to work with like, I already knew I was quitting work within a certain
Wow.
amount of time because God had called me into ministry. So I didn't tell anyone yet because it was still a few months out and I didn't want anybody to think I wasn't like dedicated to the work that I was doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I already knew in my head that I had a timestamp at the end of my position that I had earned, I had worked like 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get to this point, and I was already,
Wow.
Yeah. And we knew immediately that God's call on our lives was missionary, just to step into like a more missionary lifestyle. And so, like, within the month, the Lord was like, I want you to get an RV. I want you to travel to California and go pray over all of the places that were damaged with fire. And then during that time, like, we met another missionary family and did like freestyle rap street preaching with them, which was super
That's
cool.
cool.
So
and
we've
it
just
turned
been
into
on.
like we basically had like church services on the Santa Monica Pier and like Huntington Beach. We did a weekend in Huntington Beach, so we were just like this
Malibu.
traveling LA like church basically, and
Wow.
we would set up where the people were. And then COVID hit, and we were still doing it, but with no one around.
Wow.
So it kind of transitioned into like an online ministry, and then now we're not that we haven't wanted to, and we have been doing in-person stuff, but it's just been, I don't know.
Yeah. And it's funny, it was like kind of the revival camper, like the revival RV
Oh.
traveling missions, like before it was like a thing that lots of people were called
Yeah.
into. And it's really cool. But we just knew like ultimately, like, David is Jewish, his ancestry is Jewish, and so, like, my kids are Jewish too. I'm like the only one in our family that's not Jewish. And so, like, we knew that God was focusing us in on missions for the Jewish people, but he was leading us on this long journey of missionary work, to kind of like prepare that,
Yeah.
right, and prepare us for it. And so, yeah, that's kind of basically what we've been doing. And then recently we were in Reno, Nevada, and the Lord just said, open a house church in Galveston, Texas. So that's where we're at now,
Wow.
is Galveston, Texas, and we've got a house church in our home,
Wow.
and it's been growing like steadily ever since we started 3 weeks ago.
Man.
And it's just amazing. Like, when the Lord's hand is on it, right? Like, he lights a fire under it, and it's just like, okay, everyone go. Like,
Yeah.
the Father is doing something, just like Jesus says, right? Like, I see the Father doing something, I'm going to do my Father's work. Like, oh, all right, Lord, like, you lit a fire here, we'll do it,
Wow.
So that's what we've been doing and where we're at.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Well, we're blessed to finally have we have a house church, so that means we have a
Yeah.
house.
We
Which is
have a house
Yeah.
now after almost a year. Like, it's been over a year and a half that we haven't had an actual home.
Wow. And I bet it feels like a
yeah,
Yeah.
there
mansion.
was
It
yeah.
does. No, I'm walking around. It's like a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm like, wow, all this space. Like, it totally feels like a mansion.
Yes, my husband and I were
Oh,
thinking that, like, even just
I
going
love
from
it.
200 to 800 square feet, we're like, what are we gonna do with all that space? It's gonna be crazy. But it's
Yep.
just, yeah,
hmm
that's just such a great feeling. It's a unique feeling to realize how little that we really need. We just really need
Yeah.
God. Like,
Yeah.
that is our full dependence, you know? Um,
Yes. And when you, total side note, but when you like have less and like totally just the necessities, like, your focus is totally the Lord. It's like you can't even think about anything else. You're just like, okay, God,
yeah.
like, I'm here with
I
you.
can so believe that. And I just want to add here for our listeners, Dietra and David are parents. So just pray
Mm-hmm.
for those little voices in
Oh,
the
yeah.
background. we never.
Is it really loud?
No, no, it's just the most beautiful
Okay.
background noise hearing them giggling. I
Oh,
love it.
good.
So I just wanted to
Good.
share that for our listeners. We never treat kids as a nuisance on our show, and we just welcome them. So as you're listening and hearing them giggle, just
Mm-hmm.
feel free to lift them up in prayer and let them keep
yeah.
enjoying themselves in the background while their mom and dad talk. They're just so cute. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
Good. Good.
so yeah, so this is where you guys are now, and you've been doing that for about 2 years. You've been
Mm-hmm.
married for 8. So, like, take us to
Yeah.
the next 6 years back, and what that's been like, and or you can start from
hmm
how you guys met, and then fill in the middle, because it
Yeah.
sounds like you guys have come an incredibly long way, since from who
Yeah.
you guys used to be, to who the Lord has molded y'all to be now, and is molding you guys to continue
hmm
growing into.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we met we met in San Francisco, California, which I could just stop there as
I
like
know. Yeah.
as what we're
We
doing.
met in San Francisco.
That start that
And
yeah.
we're both yeah, we're both from California.
Okay.
She's from Northern California. I'm from San Diego. So, two different Californias
We
pretty
met in the
much.
There
middle.
you go.
Yeah, basically met in the middle. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that when that happened in our childhood,
Mm-hmm.
especially for me, like my mom died when I was
Yep.
16. And I think that kind of put me on a trajectory to, for years, like in my early college years or whatever, like 18 to 20 ish, like I felt like I was like, and I wasn't saved. And I felt like I was like a woman, like I was a lesbian in a
Mm.
man's body. Like I was never attracted to men really.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't feel like a man.
Mm.
And so I had this weird, like that's kind of how I used to describe it in those years was I felt like I was kind of a girl. And I think a lot of that psychologically goes back to the loss of my mother at a young age, so
I'm sorry.
um, so that's kind of, where I was coming from before I met Dietra. Is I was very I wouldn't say flamboyant, like with mannerisms, but just dress. Like
Yeah.
I was all about pushing people's perception
Mm,
boundaries, like, and I was always very anti-authoritarian growing up. So I think part of me was just kind of like trying to get people to realize, like, you can't label me.
mm,
And so trying to just push back against things. And yeah,
Hmm.
so anyways, I would just, I was very fluid with my gender as far as like dress goes, and I'd wear lipstick and stuff like that. So
cool. So it was like
And you
past.
were really
Oh,
like,
sorry.
go ahead.
So like just trying to not necessarily put a label on it, but like would you say it was like past androgynous?
um
Like Prince was
not
like
sure I know what.
androgynous.
This is
Oh, sorry. Androgynous is like when you don't dress like either genders. Like
Uh-huh.
the singer Prince,
Yeah, yeah.
how he wore, sequins and high heeled boots. Like he was
Yeah.
androgynous, if that makes sense. He didn't dress like a man, but he
Well,
didn't dress like a girl. Would you say yours was more
yeah.
like that, or like you dressed girly or like cross dressed or
I wasn't necessarily cross-dressing. Like I would play I was in a band in those years, and I'd play shows with like lipstick and a dress on.
okay. Okay.
But for the most part, it was just kind of like, I guess in the San Francisco years, it was probably more like the Prince thing, where it was like just, men
Yeah.
and women stuff all in the same outfit.
Gotcha. Like Freddie Mercury, like back in the day, Freddie Mercury. Got it. Okay. Sorry. I'm not trying to
yeah.
like,
And
make it make sense.
no,
I'm
it's
just trying
good.
to give people a visionary, give myself a visionary of like what
Right.
exactly we're referring to. So that makes
And
sense.
it's
Yeah.
good. I think partly for him talking about it is cuz he hasn't really, like, we both, it's a very new thing for us to kind of step into this labeling, because the world likes to do that, right? It
Yeah.
likes it likes to create its own, so it just brings more chaos into it. But it's like, oh, look, this is a chaotic thing,
Hmm.
and then we're going to label it more chaotic things.
Right.
So we haven't really thought about like the labels of it,
Uh huh.
really.
Well,
But
and
just
I'm
to
terrible with that. So
explain,
like when you put those terms
Sorry.
together, I'm like,
What?
because even Dietra will talk to me in those, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Sorry.
I'm like, if it has to do with theology, I totally got you.
Okay.
But
My bad.
yeah, and that kind of stuff, I feel like it's just kind of evolving all the time
Yeah.
too.
It's hard to keep up
Like
with.
those
yeah,
terminologies. So yeah, anyways, so
Yeah, no
you'll
worries.
have to forgive me a little.
No, no, no. And I say it just in the idea of like for whoever's listening kind of thing. I'm a very visual
right.
Yeah,
person, so even like
Hmm.
I don't expect everybody to know who Freddie Mercury is, but um just thinking about like
But we
how
know.
he how he like that was his goal, was to push boundaries and to like
yeah,
um take away those labels and broaden that
Yeah,
fluidity before it was a
yeah.
thing.
yeah,
And so yeah,
yeah.
I'm totally tracking with you now. That's like it makes more sense.
So,
Yeah.
One, growing up and this kind of brings me why I went to San Francisco in the first place, is I went to art school in Portland, and
Oh
then I went
wow.
to Indiana for a little bit, and then I went back home to San Diego, and it was like culture shock coming. Like, even though I was from San Diego, when I came from Indiana, it was like I got used to Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
how it's like slow and everybody's super nice, and I still call everyone sir, and I'm super, that's not the norm in San Diego.
No.
But when I went back to San Diego, um, I just felt like kind of, I don't know, San Diego compared to a lot of California is very uh, it's kind of a Republican county, and they're not super, other than like certain parts of downtown, it's not like super welcoming to that kind of stuff, I guess,
No.
even back
I
then.
went 3 years
And
ago
so
this week, I
I
realized.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I noticed that was such an interesting place to visit because, like you said, there's just like that little strip where you're like, oh, this is gay town. Like but the rest of the city is
Yeah.
not like
Yeah,
that.
there's like Hillcrest.
Yeah. Because I think we went
And
to a
then yeah, there's
restaurant.
little pockets of it.
Yeah. We went to a restaurant in that district I think you're talking about. It was a Thai restaurant. And I remember we were eating food and we heard this couple talking behind us on a date. And I was like, wow, they sound really odd. And I turned around and it was a transgender guy or like a cross-dressing guy and another guy on a date, but they were talking about baseball. And I was like, what is going on right now? I'm so confused. So, okay, now
Yeah.
I'm so like, I got the location, I got the visionary. I totally
Yeah.
know like what you're meaning right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I moved back from Indiana, I was like 19 or something like that. And I just felt like I grew up in the suburbs of San Diego. So when I moved back, I was like, I want to live in the city downtown or whatever. But San Diego, the city downtown, isn't really like for young people that much. So when I moved there and I was in this kind of gender fluidity thing going on, it just didn't fit me that well.
Mhm.
And so I ended up moving to the Bay Area because
Okay.
I felt like, okay, I had lived in Portland, I had lived in San Diego, and I felt like, San Francisco's halfway. And I liked both for different reasons.
Mhm.
And I felt like San Francisco would be more
Accepting.
accepting,
Okay.
yeah, to who I thought I was at the time.
And
So
maybe like, and I think building the identity, right? Because those years we were so focused on building who we were and what our identity was. Like we're
mhm.
talking 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like San Francisco had that feel, right? It was like, oh, like I could go there and I could just be so fluid. I could just do like my identity can be fluid, my
Mhm.
gender can be fluid, my like people aren't going to look at me strange if I want to wear lipstick today or, just
Exactly.
anything.
Yeah.
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 Because
So yeah, and then we met in San Francisco. So if I hadn't moved there, and that's why I said in the beginning of the podcast, it's like if I hadn't moved to San Francisco for those reasons, I wouldn't have met
Mhm.
my wife and
wow,
then gotten saved and then et cetera, et cetera. So
man.
um,
So I'll share my part, but it's probably going to involve a lot of you and meeting you, and my perception of you because I grew up in, oh, I'm kind of going back.
Go for
Um,
it. Take us there, Deidre.
so, no, I'm like, so I grew up in the church, actually, a Baptist church. And for a few years there, it was kind of a cult.
Oh no.
Basically, they believed that they were the only bride of Christ for
Wow.
a short period of time under a pastor, and then like the pastor switched, and then we were kind of like that. But
Wow.
um, there was a lot in my family. We hopped from between two Baptist churches, but basically, I grew up in a Baptist community church, and at a very young age, like we were taught of what sin was, and kind of like what female is versus what male is. And it was I would say it was so heavy into that.
Hmm.
Like pants were demonized, tank tops were demonized, like just anything that like fell under. So basically like gender was defined for me by that church. And like anything that they said was female, anything that was male. And like if so it's so strange because like this is what was being like a doctrine that was being pushed on me as a child, and but I would go home and my parents weren't like that. So then I would be wearing like pants at home, or like I had two brothers and I was the oldest, and so like I had a tomboy phase,
Hmm.
and like I was into mud and getting dirty and bugs and animals and farming, so like I there was a lot of my life that the church, which was a huge part of my life too, would say was male, and so I just I kind of I wouldn't say like I ever had this girly phase of me, like it's funny listening to people talk about like how they're like girly things growing up, right? Like, oh, I dreamt about my wedding, or like I had everything planned out. I never thought once about my wedding. I never thought once about Prince Charming. Like, I watched
Oh.
all those movies, but I just didn't care. I was like, I don't know. It was just different for me. I was not really attracted to that kind of like how the world was portraying even female. And I was in such like I would say even like a boot camp type of like what female was at my church. Like, you must be like this. That I just kind of naturally went with it. And so the skirts, like in my head, I didn't understand this until I was older, but every all of that, like the female identity was being created for me, and it was not biblical, like none of it. It was like the heavy extreme, like where the church can go wrong.
Gotcha.
Defining it, and then also like the culture, right? And so kind of like putting those two together, it just confused me. Like, it was just nonstop confusion regarding that. And I remember one time, because they talked about it a lot, like at my church when I was younger, they talked about homosexuality and why it was abomination to God and how evil it is, and not necessarily explaining why, but just saying it's evil, you know? And so, like, by the grace of God, like, my mind was kind of protected from the demonizing. Like, I didn't step into doing it myself, but there were people around me that were doing it all the time. But just in my childlike nature, like, I thought it was wrong.
Okay.
So I was like, well, I'm not going to demonize that person that way. Like, I don't believe that that's right. So there was one time though when I was about 10, and I was grocery shopping with one of my friends who is like gorgeous woman, right? Like, even at 10 years old, like, she's just been gorgeous her whole life. But she was really one of my best friends, and like, compared to her, like like, standing next to her, obviously, like, I look more manly than her. It's just like a normal thing, like, oh, obviously she's gorgeous, like, can't stand next to her. But even at 10 years old, like, there was such a difference that I noticed in her and me. Like, she was so girly, she was so feminine, quote unquote feminine, like what the world culture was saying and what our Baptist culture was saying. And like, I just was not like that.
Yeah.
But we were grocery shopping one day, and we were just kind of joking around. And out of nowhere, this comment comes behind me that says, Daddy, like, it's literally a 6-year-old girl. And she looks at her dad and goes, Daddy, that girl, points at me and says, is flirting up a storm with that other
Oh
girl.
no.
And I froze, because thinking about all of the, like, how hated homosexuality was, or flirting with same sex, was in my church, I froze. And I was like, literally, I was joking and laughing with her, and we were having a good time. And then I just froze and just shut
Aw.
off. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm evil. Like, all of that came into my mind. Like, I'm an evil person. I must be homosexual. Like, I must be like attracted to same sex. Like, how could I be flirting and not know?
Yeah.
But then later I like met another girl that was my best friend, and sorry, hold on.
You're fine.
I'm like wondering if I should share this. Lord. Okay. Sorry, because I'm going way back. I'm sorry.
We can go way back. I just want to make sure we have time to get to.
We're good.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But this is like the. So the Baptist, okay, the churches that I grew up in too were not very like hands-on with teaching their children about sexuality, or like just biblical sexuality, and like I think it was just all ignored and overlooked. And so I found myself in a lot of situations with girls who would ask me to pretend to be the husband. And like, while that sounds like innocent, like it is. Okay, let's play mommy and daddy. Okay, let's play like, husband and wife. Great. But I was always the daddy and I was always the husband. And there was one time where it like turned into like this girl wanting to actually like kiss me and kind of like love on me like I was a man. But I was so confused by it because I wasn't necessarily like, it didn't do anything lustful wise in me as a child, but I still was confused by it. Like, oh my gosh, if my lust is in check here, like I'm not lusting after like the same sex, but like I am aware that there's something going on where like I keep finding myself in these situations where I'm
It's like you hear it
the
enough, you
male.
start to believe it.
Right. And anyway, so can kind of jump a little bit forward. That's like my perception of, what I was kind of carrying with me, because then I was put into a public high school, from like private Christian high school my whole life into public. And then I think like by the Lord's grace, because there was so much other stuff that I was dealing with, right? He was like, okay, let's just like shelf this for a little bit. Let's like protect Dietra for a little bit from this. But it was always like my close girlfriends that, like, I had a really close girlfriend in high school that was androgynous, but she was attracted to men, but she still dressed kind of like manly. And so during high school, I dressed manly, and it was actually like a spite against my dad. And the way that I had grown up in the church, I was like, you know what? Like, screw you guys. Like, you've caused so much pain in my life. Like, I'm going to dress however I want. And it just so happened that it wasn't what what people consider feminine. It was masculine. And anyway, so that was high school. And then out of high school, I actually found myself in a lot of situations with girls that were super attracted to me. And like, we had like relations, but I always kind of like kept that lust in check even then, until I got to San Francisco. And then I got out of a horrible relationship and I was just like, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to go all out. Like, I've been hearing this lie be spoke over me, and back then I didn't think of it as a lie, but now looking back, like, it was a lie that I'm, attracted to same sex. I'm evil. I'm going to hell. I would hear that all the time, like, for this. So I don't care. Like, I'm just going to explore this and see how it goes. And it turned out to be really painful and horrible, because like, whenever we give in to Satan's lies, it always is.
Yeah.
But, and my experience was more broken, I think. And I had like a woman recently, I was sharing my story with her, and she was like, oh, so cool. You like, that's a part of your past and you like accept it and you're like glad that it's a part of you, but like, you're not like that anymore. And I was like, hold on.
Yeah, no.
I was like, no. Like,
if I could
it was
undo all
so
of that,
painful.
I would do it. That would be my number one wish to the genie. Like, no, that was not.
Right.
Don't accept that. That sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah, because if she were to be in that sense, like, she's still hanging on to it as part of her identity,
right. Yeah. And it was painful. Like, my experiences when I finally gave in to like the lust aspect of it, and like finally was like, you know what? Yeah, I do think women are beautiful. Like, and that's more of where I was fluid, is like, I just didn't have a quote unquote prejudice, I guess, weirdly, against like what beauty was. And so I just was like, everything's beautiful. Like, what? And it weirdly like makes me think of Eve, like partaking of the fruit. It's like, oh, the tree is good for fruit. Like, that's kind of what I thought of as like, women's bodies
Yeah.
too. And I think that's more of what I was attracted to, is like the woman's body is just like, it's beautiful. It's God's creation. I even thought that too. Like, it's God's creation. It's beautiful. It's like this miracle.
Yeah, why shouldn't
And
I enjoy
so,
it too? Yeah.
yeah. So, and even it's like that lie from Satan of like putting that fascination in there,
Mhm.
because, or like over fascinating about like the body.
Mhm.
And it wouldn't matter to me. I was just like, oh, male is fascinating, woman is fascinating. And it's all beautiful. uh so yeah, but my experiences when I finally like let just like the lust aspect go and didn't have any more self-control over it were so broken and painful. Like, I found myself in situations of rape
Mm,
with
I'm
women.
sorry.
And it's so strange saying that, because like you think, oh, that doesn't happen in same-sex
Oh, it so
relationships.
does.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely.
Happens all the time. And that's like my only
Mm,
experience with same-sex relationships where it got to that point, was like I was actually being forced into something, and I was
so sorry.
like legitimately saying no, and they were not
Mm,
stopping. And so when I saw that that happened on both sides, right? I was just like, wow, like I don't even trust myself
yeah.
anymore. Like, I don't even trust myself. My identity is completely broken and shattered. Like, who is this person? It just brings pain.
Mm,
That's just all that it brings, is pain and brokenness, and more pain to other people too.
mhm.
and and then enters Jesus.
Oh,
Well, always, like, Jesus was with me the whole time, because
yeah.
like I said, I grew up in church, and like
Yeah.
I came to Christ in a like legitimate way as a 4-year-old. um and he was always with me.
Mhm.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
but oh, sorry, I'm talking so
Go
much.
for it. You're good.
Okay. So around that time in San Francisco, when I was like exploring, or just like allowing like that exploration to kind of control me, um, I met David, and his name was actually Chase at the time. So
Was that just like a
I
nickname
met
that you had?
Chase.
No, David's my legal middle name.
Okay.
So when I had that vision, actually, where the Lord called me into ministry, he said, your name is no longer Chase. You're to go by David.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
then I thought, like, in the Bible, in those situations where God's talking to somebody, they usually kind of answer back and like
Mhm.
ask questions to the Lord. So I was like, well, while I got him here, I was like, why, is that necessary, is what I asked him. And he said, for most people, no, but for you, yes.
Mm,
So he said, you're a new creation in me, and you're still acting like the same old Chase.
mm,
So for me, it was like, he's like, I want you to reinvent your identity in me. And in order to do that, he said, for most people, no, but for you, yes, meaning I had to completely, um, yeah, I had to, like, my identity changed in being David,
yeah.
And so, yeah, I've been going by David for about 2 years
Oh,
as well,
wow.
pretty much since the ministry began.
And what's kind of amazing about that is it's helped us in this weird way kind of heal,
Mm,
I think, from those past identities, because when I look back on that time, I'm like, oh my gosh, it was Chase.
mm.
Like, it wasn't David.
Yeah.
It was, but I
He's
don't
a whole
know. So
different
it's,
person. Yeah.
yeah. And he was. And
Mm,
I met him, and like, we both broke up with our exes on the same day. Like, we were not really interested in relationships. We were still recovering from how painful they were
mm,
before. And but we both had these like experiences since our exes that we were like kind of fooling around. I don't know if that's a good word. What's like a nice having relations with same sex and kind of like exploring that. And he told me his experiences, and just to kind of talk about like what my perception of you when I first met you, like, he shaved his whole entire body. Like, I saw you wear lipstick. To me, you had this like manly face, but you were so soft. And I
mm.
think that's like, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but like, I think that's kind of like what a mask looks like from like demonic stuff or like giving into your sin so much that like you actually look like you're like, it's kind of like you're the image, we're made in the image of God, right? So what is our God? What God are we serving at that time? Well, we start to kind of look like our
Oh,
gods.
yeah. Yeah, you start
And
getting
so,
well, I almost said that too,
yeah,
but even when I think of living as a lesbian, like girls they start to look like men. Like even if they're not doing
yeah,
testosterone, like they start to just adapt more manly
Mm.
features.
yeah,
It's the strangest
Mm-hmm.
thing. But you are so right. Even
yeah.
the feet, that's what I always notice. Like more like
Oh,
I don't know why. This is just my theory. Somebody correct me or like, if you've ever noticed this, but like more masculine lesbian women have like really manly feet and they're ugly. Like and I'm just like, well, you can what? Like how does that even
no, it's
happen? Like how did you grow hair on your feet? Like you're a girl. That doesn't happen. What in the world? So I think you're so
and
on to
that's so
something. It's the
crazy.
strangest thing.
Well, yeah, and this feet thing, like, I just have to bring this up now that you said that because back then, like, David has these huge feet. It's so strange now we're just talking about feet. But David has these huge feet. And, like, but they looked so feminine. Like, I
Interesting.
remember looking at them and he painted his
Hmm.
toenails like feminine colors, like salmon pink and stuff. And, like, he shaved from top to like everything. I didn't even shave that much. So he was like smooth and like always looked sleek, like more, and it's just definitely embodying like the
Yeah.
effeminacy. Um, and even though like he wore dresses like occasionally, like he talks about like with shows, like he was still wearing like high-waisted women's pants, high-waisted shorts, like in these crop tops, like he still looked
The popular 2010 hipster outfit was
in
pretty
San
much.
Francisco.
Gotcha.
Which
Wow.
was more like, it was like the Castro district inspired.
Yeah.
Wow. So were you still like did
um
you dress girly, Deetra? Like what did you dress feminine or did you dress more masculine? Or did you just dress however you wanted it to too?
yeah, so during that time, surprisingly, and I think it was like I just didn't want to be labeled anymore as like the man,
Mm-hmm.
because like I did, even though, and this is going to sound horrible for a second, but like even though like standing next to my one beautiful friend, like I still had beautiful features back then. And then I went to a fashion institute of design and merchandising. Like that's what brought me to San Francisco, was
Okay.
school. And so I was surrounded by models, like women who were just model status. And you cannot like, it's either gay men who are in there dressing like super feminine, or models dressing like super girly. And so like, to me that shaped more of like what I was doing in San Francisco, is like I looked like a girl and tried to look like a model and looked like really, yeah, super girly. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
my most girly phase in my life. But right before David, I cut my hair short. And it was actually, I went into um oh, what are those called?
Barbershop?
Barbershop in San Francisco, and got my hair cut by a lesbian. And she said, "This is the lesbian
Oh
cut."
wow.
And so I had like a lesbian haircut, but I was still dressing like kind of feminine. That's
Y'all
like
must
what
have been a
happened when we met.
picture. Like I can't even
We were,
imagine.
oh my
Yeah, that's
goodness.
crazy. I mean,
I
not like
know.
that's super crazy, but it's just seeing you guys now, like I can't even begin to conceptualize if I had walked
Right.
past you guys 8 years ago, 8 plus years ago on the
We're so
street. Yeah,
different.
I can't even
Yeah.
imagine.
And Jesus.
Yeah,
It's like,
for
it's because of
real.
him, like his redemption,
Wow.
like is just amazing.
So you guys meet in
Um
San Francisco. So were you guys in heterosexual relationships at the time or like a a variety of relationships?
so I think we had a variety of like relationships with people that were sexual,
Okay.
maybe, but they weren't like ever, like it was more of the sexual stuff.
Gotcha. because you had said y'all broke up with your exes. You had just broken up with your exes when you met, so it was kind of like
Oh, right. No, those were like legitimate
okay,
relationships, but like during the phase when we met,
Those were relationships with the opposite sex. So I
okay,
had a girlfriend,
yeah.
Dietra had a boyfriend, and
Yeah.
we happened to have broken up with them on the same exact day.
okay,
But we found out later because we
okay,
hadn't met yet.
And my boyfriend at the time was really supportive of like there would be women who would say, "Oh, I really wanted to do like something sexual with Dietra last night," and he'd be like, "Do it." So like even my boyfriend at that time was like encouraging
interesting.
me to like step out and explore, but I'm like when I'm with somebody, I'm with
Yeah,
them. Like so I say no to everybody
yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So
I know that I
but he
know that
was like really
happens. So
encouraging it.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're on the same page. I live the lifestyle. I know.
Yeah.
I know what y'all are talking about. Is people are wild out there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then, okay, so
And
y'all.
all of our like friendships during that time, like all of my friendships during that time in San Francisco when we had met were lesbians.
Oh wow,
So just yeah.
And I had a lot of lesbian friends too.
Yeah.
Not really so many gay friends, but and I just
interesting.
kind of always got along with girls. Like actually, when I was in elementary school,
Mhm.
my handwriting, I used to do those little hearts above the eye,
Oh wow.
like in my handwriting, because I just always sat around the
Yeah,
girls,
Yeah.
and I just always had
interesting.
girl friends that were girls, and so it's just kind of I had to shake that off in high school, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I've just always gotten along really well with girls for some
Yeah,
reason.
and
Not that I
Mhm.
didn't get along with men either, but
just better with
yeah,
girls. And you know that's so interesting because
yeah.
I was the same, but with guys. I always had a lot of guy friends, but boys never liked me like
Mhm.
romantically. And that really messed
Mhm.
with my head as a youth. And I recently got to ask my dad, like, well, why do you think I was like that? And he was saying, well, in the 90s, it was not common for a daughter to spend a lot of time with her dad. And my dad worked the night shift. So I spent the day with him
Mhm.
until and I
Mm.
went to daycare just for a few hours until my mom got out of work. And I spent a lot of my life with my dad, even as a teenager, as a preteen. Like he raised us as a single dad for a couple years. I was always with my dad. I was at work. I was at the storage garage. He was a mechanic. I was always at
Mhm.
the car shop. I was always hanging around guys. And so he was just saying how his theory is like he wanted me to be able to know how to interact with men. And like I guess in that
Mhm.
generation, that wasn't really a normal thing to do, but in my sin, like I took that um that positive and like let Satan twist it, where that could have been something.
Mhm.
I see now it's given me an advantage, like in my marriage, where I was like, oh, that's how guys are. Like I don't know why, but they just that's how God has made guys, and it doesn't make any sense. But this, I get it. It's annoying, but I get it, and it's
Yeah.
not it doesn't define my identity. It's just something that helps me understand the opposite gender better. So that's interesting
Mm.
that you mentioned that, because I was like, man, if I was younger and I had just like latched on to that pot like that benefit, that would have been so much healthier than how I
Yeah.
how I used that character trait that was built into me instead, and like how Satan just twisted it and made me believe like, well, you're just not a girl. No, like I just
Yeah.
understand men
Hmm.
better. That's all. Move
Yeah.
along, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and that's probably the biggest thing we have going against us nowadays is just the imprint from the outside on our identity and the different things spiritually and physically and mentally and that are trying to push at all these different ends, and we're just kids, we're just
Yeah.
trying to figure things out,
You're just trying to hang
and
out and have
yeah,
Yeah.
fun because you're
Yeah.
and we don't
kids.
know who we are.
Exactly.
And so if people are
Yeah.
telling you who you are from that young of an age, you believe it.
Yep.
You just take their word on it because you're a kid. You believe. When my son comes up to me and asks me a question, I tell him the answer. Like he believes that I'm telling him 100% the
Yeah,
truth,
because he
and
trusts
so there's
you.
a lot of responsibility on the adult to make sure you're speaking truth into the child. And
Yes,
that's the main role of the parent.
absolutely.
Yeah, and if we grow up without like the biblical truth of who we are being spoken over us, then we're just
Yeah.
lost like completely. And it's like that verse, just tossed to and fro in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's how even our identities feel like when we're growing up, especially without, God's like biblical, like if this is important, like even as parents, like we need to get this. We need to go,
Yeah.
okay, no, maybe my son and my daughter need me to speak over them more about what their identity is in Christ and their why they're image bearers of,
Yeah.
God, of our Heavenly Father.
And I just want to read
Um,
that verse that you mentioned really quick. So it's from Ephesians.
mhm.
It's in Ephesians 4. I'll start in verse 12 in the new, let's see, see where the sentence starts. Verse 11, I'm reading from the ESV. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes.
Mhm.
And yeah, it takes time uh, to learn how to do that. And when you're young in those formidable years, that's not the time. But like you were
Yeah.
saying, that 18 to 20-year-old period is just so important. And so just being able
Yeah.
to tie in, you had a death of your mom in those formidable years at 16, and then for
Hmm.
Dietra having like grown up in just such a legalistic, I'd even say, and like false gospel
Mhm.
church, like that's a lot of time taken away that could have been invested into growing y'all's identities
Hmm.
under the word of the Lord. And so
Yeah.
it's just like it kind of makes sense, like, wow, okay, no matter what the situation in the scenario is, like without God, like we're just being tossed to and fro. um and that's so
Mhm.
it's man, it's hard, but like God is good to redeem us and redeem our stories. Um, but like you said, I
Hmm.
definitely 100% agree. We definitely have to take this seriously as parents, and that's why I'm thankful to have you guys on this, where we can learn how to handle this in an adult setting, like when we're talking to college youth and young adults and young couples. But
Mhm.
then even just thinking, okay, well, we've got to train up our kids and how they should go. And if we don't do these things in these beginning years, like these are some of the paths that they can go down if we don't get this right, like you said.
Hello, blue. There's nothing can hold me when I hold you. Goodbye, gray sky. Hello, blue. There's nothing can hold me. There's nothing can hold me. Goodbye, gray sky. Hello, blue. There's nothing can hold me when I hold you. Goodbye, gray sky. Hello, blue.